And if you look at the work that's being done by various individuals with regard to ketamine and the near-death experience, they can reproduce a near-death experience by giving somebody ketamine. And it's because ketamine is like glutamate. I mean, it clearly is a very, very powerful mind-altering drug. And the question is, and I've always said this, that the brain processes reality. So therefore, if your reality is perceiving a different reality, it doesn't necessarily mean you're insane. You're reacting to what your senses are telling you. Schizophrenia, for example. You know, people hear voices when they have schizophrenia. I argue that what's happening is that the channels of communication, the doors of perception that Aldous Huxley called them, they're wide open in schizophrenia. So therefore, the communication channels between the left and right brain are completely open. And a schizophrenic eidolon is perceiving the universe as sensed by the daemon itself. People who have temporal lobe epilepsy, it's slightly less open. People who have migraine or people who are bipolar, it's less open again. But they're all perceiving the wider something. And
absolutely.
And it's profoundly important we listen to what these people perceive. And it must be so frustrating, isn't it? You know, have you ever watched the movie A Beautiful Mind and read the book by Sylvia Nasser?
I love that film.
Now, that book to me really gets across how real schizophrenic hallucinations are. You know, they're not seeing an hallucination and thinking, oh, I'm going mad and I'm pretending to see these things. Their inner world is completely logical. The beings they see within their own worldview are logical. And that's what happens with John Nash in that movie, doesn't it? You know, and you follow his route in
dark, shadowy figures out of the corner of his eyes. So, and to me, that I always say to him, well, your door into reality is just wider open than everybody else's. You know, the brain and the neurological system, essentially, you could look at it like a filter or traffic lights or another analogy similar. You know, if we were to be able to perceive the full spectrum of everything out there, we'd probably be completely useless. So
this is exactly what a guy called Henri Bergson, who was a French psychologist philosopher, said when he first coined the term of the doors of perception. I think Henri Bergson was involved in that, and what he said was that the human brain is an attenuator. What it's there to do is to stop us perceiving the totality of the external reality, and it filters the information. And if you look at it psychologically, there's something called the cocktail party effect. You know, the idea you're at a cocktail party and people are talking all over the place. If somebody the other side of the room mentions your name, you hear it straight away. Or somebody hears it, which means part of you is scanning the reality all the time. That is your daemon, and your daemon is open to everything. But your eidolon can't be allowed to perceive this. Raynor Johnson, who was a physicist, he used the analogy of the Irish Round Tower, and he said that it's like most of us have lived our lives in the top of a round tower in a little room with 5 windows, which are our 5 senses. When you become schizophrenic, or when these things happen, it's like you've discovered a trapdoor in the roof of the round tower and you've opened it up and you see the reality behind the reality. As William Blake said, if the doors of perception, if the windows of perception were cleansed, we would see reality as it really is, infinite. We don't.
Yeah.
We've closed ourselves in.
That's it. We're going to go for a song very soon. But before that, something we touched on the other day, and obviously we've touched on it now when we're talking about drugs. And David Wilcock is someone who, the more I read of his work, the more I'm amazed. Like similar to yourself, when the more I read of a book or watch a presentation, the more I'm just amazed by how relevant it is at this moment in time. Now, what he says, one of the things he says is, we won't need to use the drugs to get there. We'll be able to train our mind to actually get there. And this obviously relates in his opinion to 2012. So we'll probably delve into that in the final part of the show and look to take some questions that we've got through from our listeners.
Okay, and also if we can touch on Philip K. Dick, it would be good as well.
Excellent, yeah, definitely. Okay. I've got a quick shout out. Now, Sinead went on Dublin City FM. This podcast is now available on tnsradio.com. Check that out. Now, before we listen to a song, we touched on drugs. We'd mentioned Huxley and Philip K. Dick. Now, we'll definitely go into Philip K. Dick because me and Johnny have spoke about him a few times when we were talking about films, especially things like Blade Runner and whatnot.
Total Recall as well.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to Total Recall when they remake that one. Funnily enough, remaking a Total Recall. What's your experience with Philip K. Dick for anyone that isn't familiar with your work?
Wow. Philip K. Dick, to me, is in the final chapter of my book, The Daemon. I have a whole section on Philip K. Dick because Philip K. Dick experienced virtually every element of Cheating the Ferryman and the Daemon Eidolon Dyad. And indeed, I recently interviewed Tessa Dick, Philip K. Dick's widow, and Tessa and I discussed the implications of what I'm writing with regard to Phil Dick and his life. And it's uncanny, the amount of information I've dug out. For instance, you may or may not be aware that Philip K. Dick... Well, I'll just explain a little about Philip K. Dick anyway for the people who haven't heard of him. If you haven't heard of him, you'll definitely know the movies that either were directly based upon his short stories or his novels, or if you haven't done that, you will know of the movies that have been influenced by his work. But movies like Total Recall, Minority Report, Paycheck, the list goes on and on with movies directly made from his work. But also the Wachowski brothers have long said that The Matrix was very much based upon Philip K. Dick's worldview. Now, the reason that Philip K. Dick wrote the way he did, and in my book I go into great detail about this, is that Philip K. Dick was clearly perceiving things in his real life that he put into his novels. I have evidence that he had phenomenal precognition. For instance, I managed to get hold of a letter he wrote to a pen friend of his called Claudia Krentz around about 4 or 5 years before he died. And in this typed letter, he turns around and says, "Gloria, I'm becoming precognitive." Man lying flat on his stomach between a settee and a coffee table. 4 years later, Philip K. Dick's neighbours had to knock the front door down of his house to find him lying face down between a coffee table and a settee. For my theory to work on this, though, the visions, the demonic visions that he saw, his daemon had to have perceived them. And if Phil had been unconscious from the time he had the stroke until he died 5 or 6 days later, it wouldn't have worked. But Tessa was at his bedside during that time, and she has actually said to me on live radio that Phil became conscious again. And if people who know my hypothesis will know that that was profoundly important piece, and that's the only time, if you read every biography of his, they say he didn't regain consciousness. He did, which is important. But Philip K. Dick himself, he had something called his theophany, which took place in March of 1974, where he suddenly realized he was a dual being. He realized that he was two beings. And he wrote a novel about this called Valis, which you're probably aware of.
Yeah, for sure.
And Valis is his semi-fictionalized account of what happened to him afterwards. And if you read the book, you will realize that there are two characters. There's the narrator, who's called Philip Dick. Then there is this weird character called Horselover Fat, which is a very peculiar name, until you look at it linguistically, and you realize Horselover in Greek is Philhippus, and fat is German, and the German word for fat is Dick. So Philhippus Dick and Philip Dick. So clearly, and the symbolism, the Gnostic symbolism in there, he meets a young woman called Sophia, and Sophia unifies his two personalities into one, where he becomes a unified being. He was also, you may be aware, absolutely fascinated by split brain experiments. And in fact, the movie A Scanner Darkly, the movie that they made with Keanu Reeves, the two characters in that, there's a character called Bob Arctor, and there's another character which name escapes me, but again, they're duality characters. You know, they are the same character. But
Absolutely.
The other thing, before I finish with Philip K. Dick, many of my readers who are Philip K. Dick fans have said that Philip K. Dick predicted me as well. And this is weird. This is freaky if you've not heard this. If you're a great fan of Philip K. Dick, you'll know that I think 1964 he wrote a short story called Counterclock World. Now, if you know a little bit about me, you know that I have come up with a theory about what happens to human consciousness at the point of death. In Counterclock Work, Philip K. Dick has a character that comes up with an alarming new theory about what happens to human consciousness at the point of death. Right. Philip K. Dick could have called that character any name in the universe, and he used to play around with some fairly odd names. He called him Anarch Peake. My name is Anthony Peake. And even people like Tessa are really quite disturbed by that one. I just think it's a coincidence, but it is still one of those significant synchronicities that may or may not mean something.
You always find them. They always crop up they're cropping up more than ever. They're appearing more than ever. So if people want to sort of discard it or throw it away, then they're going to have a lot of discarding to do, because it is happening more than ever. Yeah,
you need to keep looking for them. There are a couple of guys on my forum who write on synchronicity. Marie D. Jones is an American writer who has written on the 11:11 attention phenomenon, which is an amazing book. And she's recently written a book on déjà vu, which came out 3 weeks ago, which I wrote the foreword to. And again, fascinating stuff she's dealing with. But effectively, just to finish on the whole Philip K. Dick thing, is that if you read Philip K. Dick's book Ubik, and you read my book, it will make your jaw drop, because Philip K. Dick, the central theme of the movie, they've got characters who are living in something called half-life.
All right, yeah, absolutely.
And they are existing in this point before they die. So quite fascinating stuff.
Funnily enough, Half-Life was the name of a game, wasn't it, that had a different dimension?
Oh, so it did, yeah. Yeah, the computer game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of my favourite as well, that one. Shall we try and have a look at some questions from our listeners here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's have a look. We've touched on 2012. I mean, what